Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to SIIA's webcast on the CCSSO Blue Box, Common Education Data Standards and the Impact on the Application Marketplace. I am Mark Schneiderman, SI's Senior Director of Education Policy. Before we get into today's topic, let me make a couple of announcements and cover some logistics. As you heard, this webcast is being recorded, and the slides and the audio will be posted on the SI website within the next day or two. We will be taking questions via the chat feature, so at any time, please type out your question in the chat box, and we'll probably take those toward the end, but if I see some clarification point, I might interrupt along the way. We do have a variety of SIIA other events coming up. They're all listed on our events page with the URL on your screen. One item is that we just concluded our EdTech Business Forum in New York City last week. The archive of all the presentations and keynote presentations is available at the URL provided there. We have a webinar tomorrow on opportunities in Africa. SI will also be organizing a booth exhibit at the BET Show in London coming up early in 2012. So anyone interested, get in touch with us, and specifically with Karen Billings here at SIIA. One announcement that is not listed there is our EdTech Government Forum. This is our annual spring event. We're just confirming that the event will take place March 7th and 8th in Washington, D.C., so you can put that on your calendars, and we'll have a save the date and some more information out shortly. With that, let's turn to today's topic. We have about 80 or so SI members registered to hear today's presentation and discussion. Our goal today is click too far. Our goal today is to provide you with an update on an important new initiative launched by the Council of Chief State School Officers to support state educational agencies as they're looking to transform their current data systems into comprehensive information systems built around the Common Educational Data Standards to be released next year. As you know, CCSSO is a nationwide, nonpartisan, and nonprofit membership organization representing the top educational leaders from every state in the nation, serving state educational agencies. The CCSSO Blue Box design is intended to not only provide a common data standard and architecture for how state agencies store accountability data reported by local districts, but also provide a warehouse from which local teaching and learning applications can access data. We'll hear today about the Blue Box design for implementing the CEDS 2.0 standards, and we'll provide an opportunity for your questions around the implications for application developers and content providers. So I'm pleased to be joined today by Gary West. He is CCSSO's Strategic Initiative Director for Information Systems and Research. In this role, Gary helps develop and implement strategies and goals for the use of data and information systems in education. He has degrees in mathematics and counseling and was a high school math teacher in North Carolina and South Carolina for 10 years. After becoming the Federal Projects Coordinator for a small rural school district in South Carolina, he began using a small personal computer to identify students eligible for Title I services and for matching student pre- and post-test results from the state testing program to teachers. He became the Director of Computing Services for a large school district in South Carolina's upstate and held that position for almost 20 years, continuing the assessment of teacher impact on student performance. Gary has written about the potential and actual impact of technology and data systems on the educational process. His focus has remained on student learning and the information needed to create the learning in effective and efficient ways. In late 2007, he was employed by the South Carolina Department of Education as the agency's Chief Information Officer and then as Director of Data Management and Analysis, where he led efforts to improve the record-keeping and reporting processes related to federal and state accountability. And he came to his current role in CCSSO in 2011. So with that introduction, I'll now turn things over to Gary. We'll save questions, like I said, probably to the end, but please, at any time you have them, put them in the chat box. So with that, let me turn things over to Gary. Thanks, Gary, for joining us today.
My pleasure, Mark. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share, and thanks to all of you who are online here. I appreciate you sharing an hour with us this afternoon. I'm going to divide my presentation into two parts. The first part of that, I'm going to try to set some context for the Common Education Data Standard, its development, and discuss one mechanism for implementing the Common Education Data Standard, which is the acronym is CDIs. And during the second part, I'm going to share with you some ideas about some compelling applications that you folks might be interested in looking at going forward. Keep in mind that the first part of the presentation really deals with what CCSSO's core mission is, and that is to help states build capacity to address their individual and collective needs. The second part of today is going to be way outside my realm, and that is in terms of the marketplace, but this is an area where we would like to encourage you folks to consider how things might work with this. So to set some context first, I want to share with you this slide, which I hope is readable on your screen. It's pretty small on mine in the box of being the presenter here. The CCSSO and the chiefs have set out their strategic plan for the next 3 years, and that includes the 6 goals that you see here. Implementation of college and career-ready standards, accountability systems that inform, comprehensive reform to the education workforce systems, turning current data systems into information systems, providing diverse, high-quality opportunities and options for learners, and being able to address emerging issues as those come up throughout the term of the period. I want to point out 2 things on this list. All 6 of these require data in order to determine what the needs are, what the efforts are to meet those needs, and whether or not those needs have been successfully met. So keep that in mind. And the starred item, the transforming current data systems into information systems, is an important one from my perspective. And based on that item, there have been 4 goals that have been identified as in need of work over the 3 years of the strategic plan. States have indicated that they want to be able to change their model of operation from being compliance agencies to becoming service agencies. And in that capacity, data is absolutely necessary to be able to inform the SEAs, the state education agencies, about the needs of their districts and schools and learners, and about how to address those needs, and then to also be able to provide resources that can meet those needs. Basically, the work to be done is to turn their data systems into systems that can inform teaching and learning, that can automate federal reporting, that can support the accountability principles that have become the soul of ESEA flexibility, ESEA being the Elementary Secondary Education Act. And if ESEA were ever to be reauthorized by Congress, then data to support that reauthorization, although I'm not sure that's likely to happen in my lifetime. I'm a real old man. And the fourth item is to share data with constituencies, that is to automate and bring back to life School Data Direct and School Matters, which were databases that provided constituencies within each of the states and across the country with information about districts and schools. The federal reporting, of course, deals only with aggregated state data, so that those data would be part of the federal reporting. So that's part of the context that's there. This next slide shows the current picture of today's data systems in most states, and that is most states have an SLDS, a statewide longitudinal data system, that they have implemented or are implementing in various stages. As part of that, there are student information systems that provide data into the SLDS. There are some assessment systems that provide data into the SLDSs, and I just saw the Congress quote here. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked. But you see several sets of data with the dashed lines that are not always part of the SLDS, and thus represent other data systems that are out there. So part of what states are looking to work from, I'm going to slip past that one, is to use the Common Education Data Standard, version 2.0, as the center point for being able to work together collaboratively, collectively, as well as individually to meet the goals that were identified earlier. CEDS 1.0 was released back in December of 2010 or maybe sometime before that, and it was really insufficient to do any work. I was at a state agency in the early stages of that, and we knew that there was not much to it that we could actually implement. The efforts have been moving forward very quickly with new leadership at NCES and other places in bringing CEDS 2.0 to the education arena. CEDS 2.0 will be released near the end of January, and will include a data dictionary that will have approximately 750 data items defined, data elements defined. It will include a logical data model. It will include XML schema for data at rest based upon the data model, and it will include a set of tools that SEAs and districts can use to determine how aligned their current data sets are with the Common Education Data Standard. One of the things to note is that the Common Education Data Standard is coming out long after most SLDSs have been built or have been designed or have been structured, so that it is it's problematic to try to deal with changing the way the data systems exist within the states at this point. Part of what goes into CEDS 2.0 is that NCES, the National Center for Education Statistics, has constituted a CEDS stakeholder group which has about 65 to 70 members that come from the early learning education environment, the K-12 environment, the higher ed environment. There are standards bodies that are represented. There are also developers and content providers represented, as well as other organizations that are part of the CEDS stakeholder group. And that group is the authoritative source for the content that goes into the Common Education Data Standard. CCSSO is committed to helping states find ways to implement CEDS in ways that can help them meet the goals that were outlined earlier. CCSSO is not involved in developing the content other than we are one of the members of the stakeholder group, but we don't drive that conversation. The CEDS is developed by a lot of stakeholders who are involved in the education arena. So with that said, I want to share with you one of the conceptual strategies that we have been talking with states about and addressing with with some of you who are in the audience today and conversations about what has been going on with that. Keeping in mind that CEDS 2.0 creates a dictionary and a logical data model through which SEAs can look at implementation. The slide that you see now represents a state SLDS with the star, represents CEDS with the reddish triangle that you see there, and an ETL process. Many of you know an ETL process because you work with them and trying to get data from your customers into your applications. The ETL process is the extract, transform, and load process that it would be important within the state to work with data they have already. And then something you see there called the blue box, which is just a concept, a design concept at this point, that would be the same in every state. Part of the rationale for looking at a strategy like this is that states already have a lot of money invested in their SLDSs and in the other data systems that they have worked with. And the next slide shows that, yeah, there it is, shows that it's not just the SLDS that might be involved with this process within a state. But the idea here is that states have invested a lot of other people's money in developing their SLDSs, and thus every effort to protect that investment and not break applications that already run on those data systems is part of the strategy for being able to create a data set that can be used in collective, collaborative, and comprehensive ways within states and across states, and provide a mechanism for being able to do so together and to be able to take advantages of being able to do that. So the basic concept is this, is that states would have data sets that are out there, and SLDS would be one of those. There may also be data sets that have assessment results in those. There may be data sets that have information that comes from the student information systems within the state. There could be data sets that have lots of different data that might be needed to address the goals that were identified earlier. And so those data could be brought together through an ETL process that would be defined by CEDS, and that ETL process would create a set of data that would be stored in some fashion. The blue box is the mechanism that we're talking about here as a design mechanism. Could be stored somewhere in the CEDS format, and then applications could use the data that are in the CEDS format in order to address the goals that the states have identified. The ETL process is described in a little more detail in this slide, and which is the same graphic as you saw earlier with the ETL process broken down, where it's divided into an upper part and a lower part. There would be an extraction of the appropriate data elements from whatever data sets the state has. Those extracted elements would be defined by CEDS, and the mapping between CEDS and the data elements at the state level would identify which elements would be extracted. those elements would be transformed into the CEDS format, and then the bottom half of the ETL process could transform the CEDS data formats into a physically storable set of data in, say, XML format. And that could be stored as XML. Some other format could certainly be usable as well, and stored in the blue box. And that blue box would exist in the state. In essence, there would be 57 of these blue boxes, one in every state, D.C., and the 6 territories. And those data, the data in the blue box, and it would be a set of data. It's not an application. It's not a platform. It's not anything else. It is data that would be stored in the blue box design. Those data would be consistent with the way that the 750 elements are defined, and that format would be consistent in each and across all states. Each state could decide which data elements would be actually placed there. Some states may not want all the elements as part of their available data. They may only want 475 of those elements, and they could choose through their mapping and through the ETL process to store the appropriate elements that would be appropriate for that state. There would be no need to do anything else with that. And that would create in the state a set of data that would be appropriate for the state, and that could then be used to power applications written to access those data through whatever contractual arrangements could be made with the state. And the state would be able to manage that quite nicely. This next graphic has on the left-hand side the same graphic that you saw earlier. And this is really, and I have to tell you that the blue box is defined there where it says Comprehensive State Education Information System. I really should change the word system to data set. It really is a set of data, nothing more than that. But if you'll forgive that I'll make sure it's changed before I show this to anybody else. And to the right of that, the right side of that is something, the marketplace with an uppercase M, where applications could exist in the real world that could use the data to meet the 4 goals that we defined earlier. Those goals being inform teaching and learning, automate federal reporting, support the accountability principles that underlie ESEA flexibility and or reauthorization, and to be able to populate data sets, automate and populate data sets that have been too costly to keep online up to this point, but are important resources for communities and constituencies in every state. So this is where I come to the end of the first part of this, and this basically, when we get to the blue box is really the state's capacity. It provides capacity to the state to be able to use and cause the use of their data in ways that are important to the state. And that's really what CCSSO's goal is about here in terms of finding a way to physically implement CEDS, which includes only a logical data model and an XML schema that can define the data as they are at rest, but to actually physically cause that to happen creates the capacity for states to be able to manage data to address the goals that they have identified collectively, and also to address the goals that they may have individually within their state. And I think at that point, Mark, if there are any questions about getting it down to this point, I'll be glad to try to answer those at this time.
Okay, thanks, Gary.
I'm not through yet, by the way. I still have some more to go, but this is a stopping point.
Got it. No, that makes sense. So a couple items. One is I want to clarify for everyone something I'm not sure was crystal clear, but I had understood from our earlier conversations regarding the ETL and blue box. Those are standards. That's an architectural design. But it was my understanding, Gary, that sort of each state will be responsible for building, licensing, what have you, their technologies, their data warehouses, their whatever they need to carry that work out, and that you are not, the blue box is not CCSSO building a data warehouse model that all the states will share, for example.
That is correct, Mark, and the concept here is that we're trying to find ways, this is one of those ways, and in fact this incorporates several ways. We're trying to find ways in which states can create the capacity they need to deal with the data. Yeah, this is not a matter of CCSSO providing the ETL or the storage or anything like that. It is a matter of the states finding the appropriate contractors and developers to do so, knowing what it is they want to do to implement CEDS.
Right. Okay. A couple other questions we're getting in from the attendees. How likely is it that the local learning management systems, student information systems, etc., are compatible with the CEDS 2.0 standard, and what are some other things that are going on to make that happen? Or is it intended that in part this blue box process will give them back that data in that format?
I think from the standpoint of getting the data from the local level to the state level, and then doing with it as the state needs to do for implementing CEDS, lies largely with the state itself. One of the important things that can come from the data dictionary of CEDS is that it can actually become kind of a checklist of the data elements that would be important, and as those data elements are identified as important for meeting this goal or for being part of the calculation that meets this goal, then even at the local level, that data dictionary can be used as a checklist to determine what is being collected at the local level and what is not, and then to start the conversation about strategies to add the elements that would be necessary. At the same time that those are being added at the local level, at the state level, we know that there are mechanisms through which the state collects data already. Those mechanisms would have to be expanded also based upon that, so that as the data are collected, the record level data from the districts are collected to the state level, that the state's mechanism for collecting the elements that the state has a compelling interest in, that those are collected and validated in a process to come to the state level. We think CEDS can inform that process, and there is a lot of work to do with that, and you'll see in some of the latter slides we've identified some of that work, and we're still working on list of strategies, list of tools, list of things that might help states make decisions and help districts make decisions about about how to accomplish that work to be able to help the states collect the data. And keep in mind, SEAs, the chiefs have come to consensus about the fact that they want to become service agencies instead of compliance agencies, and thus being able to return value-added data to the districts and schools would be an important part of the overall process.
Okay, great. Another question is, where are states in this process of implementing and architecting this blue box design? Is this still in writing only, or are they starting to move forward on it?
Some states have moved forward. There were some states that began the process before this, but let me point out that CEDS 2 is not going to be delivered until the end of January. So moving forward specifically at this point is probably an issue that we haven't been able to address. But prior to this past spring, CCSSO had contracted to build something called the State Core Model, which was the beginning of a logical data model based upon what states were already using in their data sets. And the State Core Model was taken back to more than 30 states, and their data elements, their existing data sets, were mapped to the State Core Model. So in 30 some odd states, there has been mapping to the State Core Model, which also is very closely aligned. In fact, the State Core Model was given to the stakeholder group to use as the foundation for the physical model, that is, for the logical model that's coming out with the data dictionary. So 30 plus states have most of their elements already mapped to what will be the 750 elements or so in version 2 of CEDS. So there will be some tweaking of that, and that mapping can be done. Once the mapping has been done, then we know that there's still work to be done at the local level. As I said, we're defining that and trying to find ways to help states build capacity to handle that work. And we will be moving forward with, our role is to bring the states to the point where they can build capacity for themselves, and then to help them implement as we go along. But we think 30 plus states have a foot in the door already and are pushing on the door to move forward.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and I think some of the next set of questions may be answered by the rest of your presentation, and we'll revisit any that weren't addressed.
That sounds good. Thank you. I'll go ahead and I'm going to click through a couple of slides here, I think. And if questions come up about those later, I can come back to them. But one of the things, I'll stop at this one for a moment. One of the things that we want to make sure that happens with in the thinking about applications, and right now I'm stepping over into the world of you folks, and so I don't know your vocabulary, I don't know your language. I'm probably going to use words that have different definitions, so just please pardon and ask your questions as we go forward. But these are just some ideas about things that that I hope will spark some interest and give you some occasion to think about some of the possibilities here. One of the things that we want to have happen in the informing teaching and learning process is to make sure that the analysis part of the data, you see the 7 A's listed here, from acquiring data into the system, making people aware the data are there, giving them access to the data, analysis of the data, applying the analysis, assessing the application of the analyses, advancing to the next level, repopulating the data system through reacquisition of data. Those kinds of things are all part of it. And in education right now, for teachers, for administrators, others, the analysis of the work has been the hard part. And what we would like to do is to make sure that we move the analysis into the data infrastructure, so that the analyses, in cases where that's appropriate, are part of what's delivered to the educator. So the educator can simply take the analyses and apply those as appropriate for the individual student this afternoon or tomorrow, whenever that comes in, and to be able to make informed decisions based upon the analyses being part of the application. Having access to record-level data in a specific format for specific purposes, going back to the 4 goals that we identified earlier, can get that off the ground in terms of what the vendor community might be able to look at and decide how things might progress from that. So going forward, this is what they call around here the scary picture. I'm not going to go through it, but it's just a an amateur schematic of the way things might flow from the blue box through an application available in the marketplace, bringing together certain data elements to be able to inform and reinform. You guys probably do better diagrams of that than I would, and I'll just let you know it's in the slideshow and you can look at it. This dashboard is one of those things that we just threw together to give an idea. The top half and the left half of this are pretty much standard fare in terms of information that students can get from off-the-shelf applications right now. But the bottom half in the red oval gives an idea that came up from discussions with some folks in states about an application that they referred to as the Amazon model. This is an application that would say, talking about Johnny, who's the student that this teacher is looking at on this screen, to be able to say, because there's longitudinal data available for this student as well as other students, to be able to say, students like Johnny, referring to where Johnny is along the Common Core spectrum and within the scope of the content, students like Johnny have had improvements in their scores when they have used these types of educational resources, and list those resources and let the teacher choose the resource that might work best with Johnny. It's not prescriptive, it's just suggestive, but it is something that would mean that teachers would not have to go looking for the resources. The analytics would say, this is something that's likely to work with Johnny. Would you want to use it? So that's one of the strategies that's there. And by the way, it also says there are teachers within your state who have also had success with students like Johnny based upon student performance. And you can click here and start an email or get a phone number to be able to start the collaboration with one or more of those teachers as such. And then on the green side of the screen, the application might also say, and by the way, you have 4 other students who are also like Johnny. Just an idea. It's not an application we're planning to build, but it would really be nice if one of you guys did.
Gary, just to interrupt real quickly, one I think is that those types of applications and services you're suggesting are available, are being developed. I think clearly one of the big issues is being able to move across different data sets and applications in school systems and such to support that and the data mining involved there. So that perhaps is something where the blue box could assist in a way that an individual vendor can't get there on their own. So that's just a quick comment. A question or clarification or something just to point out was on a couple slides ago, the diagram you showed data coming out of the blue box into local, right there, blue box into the teaching and learning applications. So just to make crystal clear that part of the design intent here is that applications used at the local level would be populated from the state-hosted blue box. I think, could you confirm that and maybe elaborate a little on that? Because I'm not sure you went into a lot of detail where it seems to me that is a core piece of the equation.
I think that there's an issue with refresh rate here, and there are other issues that are related to this, and your membership probably has a better handle on that concept than I do. I think from a group of folks that we've met with discussed this and not in some detail, but at least in general terms. And the concept here was that the blue box is something that is updated at whatever rate the state sets or whatever the capacity of the state provides, but that applications that would be written on the blue box or that could be written on the blue box might actually inform back to the local application. And that is an issue that's related to transport protocols and other things that are within the province of the application community rather than within the province of the district or state or blue box itself. Did that make any sense?
It helps.
Okay, and I don't have a better understanding of that, but we have had those discussions, and we've had those discussions with probably a few of your members, as well as other developers that have a real need and have a real understanding of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately this is a question of, is this where and how does this loop of data exchange get closed, and how does the blue box, in the state versus local relationship involve this data? There may be perhaps some data that doesn't necessarily flow through the blue box that remains at the local level, remains in local applications.
And I'm going to, Mark, I'm going to say unabashedly that that's not a function of the blue box or the process of getting to the blue box, but that would be an application issue, and that's where your membership and their innovative and creative ways of doing things might be able to address that. We see the blue box as being refreshed based upon whatever period of time is set for that, and that the real work goes on in the local applications.
Okay.
So I'm going to skip on to a couple of other slides here. One of the important issues that the states have deals with automating federal reporting, and we've been talking with folks at USED and NCES about how that might come about if we identify within the CEDS data elements, the elements that are necessary for the reporting, then an application sitting on the blue box could in fact pull the appropriate elements, do the aggregations, calculations, accumulations, get the information into one format and shoot it off to EDFACS or shoot it off to CRDC or to OSEP or the IDEA stuff. Those kinds of things could happen. An important component of this is CRDC is a special one because that's really not a state-level reporting requirement. That is a district and school-level reporting requirement, but it comes from the record-level data. So having an application that could do that would have an impact on resources at the local level as well as at the state level. So that's and I know from my experience working in a district and at the state level that that's an important function that folks would be interested in. Next is the implementation of the accountability principles that you see listed here. These have been embedded into the ESA information, and new accountability requirements are going to involve measures of growth, measures of effectiveness, and other measures that have not been part of accountability before, and the data systems must be able to support that, and that's clearly what chiefs have in mind when they ask for their waivers or ask for flexibility in building new accountability systems. Then there's School Data Direct and School Matters, which I mentioned earlier. These contain district level and school level data. These were created manually by harvesting data from websites several years ago. We just could not maintain it in that fashion, and so we're looking for ways to automate it. These are important databases for the realtor community. In fact, the first 12 calls we had when we took these databases down came from realtors. The 13th call was from a parent who was moving into a new community and wanted to find the data. So we do have audiences that use these data, and we'd like to get that back online in an automated process as well. The next slide shows what might happen if states wanted to do some collaborative research. They could contract with a major university or research organization. An application could be written by that agency or by that university to sit on multiple states' boxes, de-identify, anonymize, do the research, and have access to data that would be compatible and comparable in doing that research. This is also a model for multi-state applications, if that ever becomes appropriate in any fashion, so that an application could be written for that. The neat thing about this, if this was say the southeastern states and they wanted the research done, the University of North Carolina might do that research and write the application. If after that research was released, the Midwestern states saw that and wanted to get the same kind of research done, then the University of North Carolina could simply pick up the application, drop it on top of the Midwestern states that contracted with it to do that, and the same research could be done. And there would be very little other work to be done with it. Or if this were a multi-state application that could access data or that should access data appropriately across states, that could be done as well. And if a state did not want to participate, they simply didn't sign up. In the Southeast, for example, my state, South Carolina, if it wanted to do what it does really well, and that is secede, it would simply not sign up to be part of the Southeastern data. And so it would not participate in that fashion. I think at that point, the other slides that I have, I don't need to touch into very much. Other than this one, I will look at this one. It shows the layers at which work must be done in order to build the capacity of the blue box for the states. And you'll see at the top, schools and districts prepare data. Seems like a very simple statement, but those of you who've worked with schools and districts trying to get an application to run with data they have there know that that's not a simple task. We are working with states right now in putting together a pick list of tasks that would need to be done along those lines, and to be able to make that available to states so that they can use that in conjunction with the CEDS data dictionary to identify where they might be, what they might need to do, and be able to move on with what they have going on. Let's see if there's anything else I need to touch on here. We think that there are clearly data quality issues. That's what this slide talks about, and the data quality is really controlled in the areas that are circled. We believe that if there are really compelling applications that can come from the vendor community to use the data that might sit in a state's blue box, those compelling applications and the results that go back to teachers or the results that go for reporting or whatever the case is will mean that the end user will want better data. And thus the demand for better data will flow uphill back to where the data starts. And we should see some impact on the quality of the data as we go forward from there. So I'll stop there, and I'll go back to this slide and just leave that on the screen for whatever purpose it might serve, and go back to any questions that you might have or any comments, anything from the audience. Okay, great. Thanks, Gary. Covered a lot of turf. We have a number of other questions, so let's see if we can provide some further clarification. Let's see. There was a technical question about the data in the blue box being available in a relational format or only in XML. I think that is not defined. We use XML because XML is an easy one to do and it's an easy one to understand. But if the states agree that a relational database might be a better way for this to be stored, and that is also helpful to the vendor community, then I think that becomes the standard. Okay. Are there any plans to define an API or other specifications that enable applications in the marketplace to make use of the data in common ways? I think that's beyond the scope of what we at CCSSO can have the expertise to deal with. I think that applications, being as innovative as they can be, can include the API as a component of the application being built, and there may be other platforms that that can provide that. You know, different ways to go about that, and we think that's a place that belongs outside of what we're talking about, of building capacity for the states to take advantage of whatever those benefits might be.
Okay. I am far from a technical expert, but I think we certainly appreciate the notion of states sort of taking on the blue box in different ways. This might be a place for further discussion, though, because it's possible that having a common API across the different state blue boxes may create an economies of scale to allow districts and applications that are used across states to plug in to the blue box without having to a unique integration for at each point in each state. So I'm not certain about that, but that might be something to take back to the more technical people, many of whom are on the call, but we're not empowering them to talk.
And I think that's an issue for you guys to raise. I don't think that's an issue for us to raise at this point. But if that's something that can be done, and I'm certain there are ways that the capacity could be built to handle that.
Okay. My guess is that that CEDS is something that is not familiar to most SI members, other than those who are intimately involved in the local to state and state to federal reporting of data. And so the questions are sort of, is the goal for the CEDS to be a standard that's adopted ultimately at the local level, and how does that fit in with SIF or other standards that have been that are in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, Mark, and your members there, is that at the local level there are already applications that are running. Those applications clearly don't align with CEDS at this point for the most part, because CEDS in an implementable form clearly has not existed till now. And as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, there is the need to protect the investment of the states and thus their member districts and schools. I think that your membership has a lot of investment out there with applications as well. And so I think that the blue box provides capacity to put CEDS into a format that becomes much more commonly known and much more commonly described as our marketplace and your marketplace evolves over the next few years. This is not going to be Monday morning you're going to wake up and we're going to have switched over. That's just not going to be the case, and I think this is going to be evolutionary. One of the things about CEDS that is very important is that it is an evolutionary standard. It will evolve as needs come along. We would never see the point where it would be thrown away and started over. And what's out there now with CEDS has been built on national efforts to build common data standards for the last 30 years, coming through NEATM and other efforts that have existed out there in the past. This is an evolution of that into the practical and implementable world.
Okay. As I think you know, Gary, we had the folks from including a couple state agency representatives, folks from the Gates Foundation on a webinar a couple months ago talking about the shared learning infrastructure. Anything you can help the group understand about how the two relate or don't relate?
I think probably I could say that CCSSO is a partner in SLI. We are actively involved in piloting the development in 5 states. That development is in the early stages at this point, and I think from from that standpoint, I would refer back to our friends at at Gates and the SLI development team about how they perceive those relationships. I can't define those at this time.
Okay. I think maybe one last question here is, actually, well, let me ask this. PARCC and Smarter Balance, the assessment consortia, is there, there's a lot of work there related to clearly data reporting, and is there involvement with them in this process, or do you expect that the states will take advantage of this to meet some of their needs related to implementing the assessments? Or what's that relationship with the
We've had conversations with Smarter Balanced and their and a group that they contracted to help build their technical structure about this, and we're really not at a point where there's any concreteness to that discussion yet. We know that there are all kinds of data elements that have to become part of the new assessment design. We know that there are test items to be considered. There are tests to be built from the test items. There is the movement of those tests to the specific student that is to take the test. We know that there has to be a mechanism, because it's going to be online testing, for being able to capture responses, store those responses. We would like to see some analysis of those responses based upon distractors, because wrong answers can tell a teacher as much as right answers in terms of what the student knows and doesn't know. There are all kinds of things that come down that have to come through that. Our expectation is that there will be some standard developed for managing that level of assessment down to the point where a score exists, and then we think it's the field that defines what of those elements should become part of the CEDS standard, and thus would go through the stakeholder group to be embedded in the standard. That's still a little distance from now, if I can mix time and distance. So I really don't have any concrete things, but we know the discussions are going on, and we know that there will be the need for different kinds of data elements than there ever has been in the past, and we see those becoming part of CEDS over time. We also, you asked a question earlier about SIF and other things like that. We think those standards, those protocol standards, exist and belong in the marketplace. And so how those standards work in the world of applications that might be built on a common education data standard is still to be defined and still to be worked out.
Okay. As your thank you. As your sort of parting comment, so those in the call will sort of think, so what does this mean for me in terms of next steps, timing? Should I be talking to states I work with about this? Should they be talking to districts? Should they be looking to implement the CEDS into their products? What are some of the, can you give a little bit of a wrap-up on what action steps they might consider, or what would be appropriate, and what sort of some of the timelines are?
Timelines, we don't really know about that, other than we're trying to get started very, very quickly, and with the 30 states that have already done some mapping, we think we can move fairly expeditiously in remapping for them without much difficulty. And but there's still the need for individual states to identify and determine strategies for the work that must be done to collect the elements they want to populate in the CEDS formats. So I really don't have times for that. And again, the issue of CEDS alignment That's still in discussion as well. What does it mean to be CEDS aligned? What does that mean for a state? What does that mean for a district? What does that mean for a developer? What does that mean for a content provider? We're having those discussions, but there have been no clear definitions about those kinds of things yet. But we just want you to know. If I put my contact information here. If any questions come up later on from among your members, please feel free to encourage them to contact us. We'll be glad to sit and talk with them.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Gary. I appreciate you joining us here today and being so generous with your time and answering all of these questions. Clearly, this is a work in progress, and so we might figure out if there's a few months down the road appropriate time to have a follow-up webinar or some other forum to take this to the next level.
And I would be really interested in hearing what you and your members have to say about the potential positive impact of this, or if there is negative impact that some of your members see in terms of their markets. We would be very interested in understanding the challenges and the benefits that your members see, and your sharing that with us would be really important. Okay, well, we can definitely do that. As I mentioned to everyone, this will be archived on the SII website under our webinar series. So with that, we're going to bring today's webinar to a conclusion. Thank everyone for joining us today, and thanks again, Gary, so much. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Please stand by.